By the time Charles Whitlock stepped off the eastbound stage and set his boots onto the dust of Red Bluff, Wyoming territory, the town already knew his name and had decided what it meant. 4 years in prison had changed the way he walked. He moved slower now, not from weakness, but from habit, as if every step still needed permission. He stood just over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, his skin burnished dark by Apache blood and western sun alike. His hair, once worn loose, was tied back low with a strip of leather. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, carved there by sleepless nights and the long arithmetic of grief. No one greeted him. A pair of men outside the saloon paused mid-conversation. A woman gathering laundry pulled her child closer. Someone spat into the dirt. "That's him," a voice said, "the one who killed his wife." Another answered, quieter, "They say prison didn't fix him, made him worse." Charles heard them all. Prison had taught him that silence carried farther than shouting. The Whitlock estate lay 3 miles outside town, perched on a low rise where cottonwoods bent toward the creek. It had once been a place of light wide porches, open doors, horses grazing freely in the meadow. Now the paint peeled from the columns, and the iron gate zigzagged on its hinges like a tired jaw. The house remembered better days. People did not. He walked the last mile on foot. The road was familiar, each bend etched into him from boyhood, from afternoons riding bareback beside the white-haired Duke who had taken him in after the Apache Wars, scattered his family to the wind. The Duke had called him son, had taught him letters, numbers, law, had taught him that a man's word, once broken, could never be fully mended. When the Duke and Duchess died within months of each other, the estate passed to Charles without contest. That alone had made him an object of quiet resentment. An Apache inheriting a white man's fortune sat wrong with some folks. They tolerated it until his wife died. The front door opened before he reached it. Cole stood in the doorway, cool and straight-backed, his hair already threaded with gray, despite being no more than 40. He wore a black waistcoat and a look of practiced concern. "Mr. Whitlock," Cole said, as if tasting the name. "You're back." Charles stopped at the foot of the steps. "This is my house." "Of course," Cole replied smoothly. "I meant, back among us." Behind Cole, the hallway lay dim and still. 2 housemaids hovered near the staircase, whispering. One crossed herself when she saw Charles's face. He passed Cole without another word. Inside, the air smelled of old polish, and something sour beneath it, fear perhaps, or neglect. His boots echoed too loudly on the wood floor. The portraits lining the walls watched him with familiar eyes. The Duke in his riding coat, the Duchess smiling faintly, and further down the hall, his wife, Margaret. Her portrait still hung where it always had, above the sideboard. Painted 2 years before her death, it showed her seated near the window, light catching in her hair. She had been kind, too kind, some said. Gentle in ways the West did not always reward. Charles stopped in front of it. 4 years, and no one had moved her. He closed his eyes. The memory came unbidden. Margaret on the stairs, her breath shallow, her lips already turning blue. The cup of tea overturned on the rug. Cole's voice shouting for help. The doctor arriving too late. The town deciding too quickly. Poison, they said. And when they looked for a hand to hold the vial, they found his. He opened his eyes again. A sharp laugh escaped his throat, sudden and bitter. One of the maids gasped. "Still laughing at ghosts, are you?" A man muttered from the doorway of the dining room. Charles turned. The voice belonged to Henry, one of the older servants. He had testified at the trial. They all had. Charles smiled then, not with humor, but with teeth. "You're still here," he said. "I'd hoped prison would outlast you." Henry stiffened. Cole stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Whitlock, You've had a long journey. Best you rest." "Don't tell me what's best," Charles snapped, his voice rasping like a cracked whip. "You didn't rot where I did." The outburst echoed through the house. A glass rattled somewhere. Charles felt the familiar surge, the heat behind the eyes, the pressure in his chest. Rage was easier than grief. Rage kept him upright. Cole raised his hands in a calming gesture. "No one wishes you harm. We only want peace." "Peace?" Charles laughed again, louder this time. "You turned my home into a mausoleum, and call it peace." He stormed past them, up the stairs, into the bedroom that still smelled faintly of lavender and old tears. He slammed the door hard enough to shake the frame. Below, the servants stood in silence. Cole's mouth tightened. By the second week, the town had settled into its story. Charles Whitlock was mad. They said he screamed at night, pacing the upstairs hall like a trapped animal. That he hurled books against the walls and cursed in Apache and English alike. That no servant could stand him long. 3 had already quit. None mentioned that he ate little, that he spent hours staring out the west window, where the hills rolled away, empty and forgiving. That sometimes very late, he read aloud in a low voice, as if someone might still be listening. Cole made sure the right rumors traveled faster than the truth. At the general store, at the livery, at church on Sunday, the message was the same. The master of the Whitlock estate was unstable, dangerous, in need of constant worry and care. Cole announced one morning, came with a generous reward. "Anyone willing to tend to Mr. Whitlock," he told the assembled townsfolk, his voice steady, "will be well compensated. Room, board, and a monthly wage higher than most earn in a year." There was a pause, and then a murmur. A few shook their heads. Others laughed nervously. No one stepped forward. 3 miles away, in a narrow house with a sagging roof and a dry well out back, a young woman named Elisa Cicero listened from the edge of the crowd, her hands folded neat in her apron. She did not laugh. She thought of her parents' empty pantry, of the bills folded and unfolded until the creases wore thin, of the way the town looked at her already, as if poverty were a kind of failing. And she thought, strangely, of the man she had glimpsed once from afar, the Apache Heir, standing alone on the road, carrying the weight of a house full of ghosts. That night, while Charles Whitlock shouted at the walls and cursed the names of the dead, a decision was quietly being made that would change the fate of them both. Elisa Crow reached the Whitlock gate just after sunrise, when the valley still held its breath, and the grass along the creek shimmered with dew. The iron bars loomed taller than they had from the road, blackened by age and neglect. She stood there a moment, smoothing the front of her worn dress, her fingers stiff with cold and nerves. 3 miles. She had walked all 3, a small bundle slung over her shoulder, her boots dusted pale with the road. The house beyond the gate looked asleep, or perhaps watchful. Its wide porch sagged under the weight of years, and the windows reflected the ski-like closed eyes. Elisa swallowed and pushed the gate. It creaked open with a sound that felt too loud for such a quiet morning. She had been warned. "He's violent," someone had whispered at the store. "He'll throw you out in a week. They say he's not right in the head." Elisa had nodded and thanked them anyway. Violence, she understood. Hunger, too. She knocked on the front door once. Then again, firmer. After a long pause, the door opened just enough for a man's face to appear. Cole looked her over from head to toe, his eyes lingering, not with interest, but with calculation. "You're early," he said. "I came to ask about the position," Elisa replied. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "The one you mentioned in town." Cole studied her a moment longer. "You're young." "I'm capable." He stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled of polish and something stale beneath it, like water left standing too long. Elisa followed him into the entry hall, her boots leaving faint prints on the floor. The silence pressed down on her ears. "Name?" Cole asked as they walked. "Elisa. Elisa Crow." "No experience caring for difficult men?" he asked. She shook her head. "I've cared for my father since his leg gave out, and my mother when she was sick." "That's not the same." "It's close enough," Elisa said quietly. Cole stopped near the foot of the stairs. "Before I take you any further, you should understand the conditions. Mr. Whitlock is not agreeable. He will shout. He may insult you. He does not wish to be touched." "I'll do what he needs," Elisa said. "That's the work." Cole's mouth twitched almost into a smile. "You're not afraid?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I can't afford to be." From above came a sudden crash, wood striking wood, followed by a hoarse shout that echoed through the hall. "Get out!" a voice roared. "All of you out!" Elisa flinched. Cole did not. "That," he said calmly, "would be him." They climbed the stairs. Each step creaked under their weight. The air grew heavier the higher they went, thick with a tension Elisa couldn't name. At the top, Cole paused outside a closed door. "Your duties are simple," he said. "You will bathe him, feed him, walk him when he allows it. At night, you will read to him until he sleeps. Nothing more." Elisa nodded. "And one thing," Cole added. "Do not contradict him. Ever." He opened the door. The room beyond was half lit, curtains drawn against the morning sun. Books lay scattered across the floor, some with spines cracked, others flung open and abandoned. A chair lay overturned near the window. Charles Whitlock stood at the far end of the room, his back to them, shoulders rigid. His hair was tied back, dark against the pale linen of his shirt. One hand gripped the edge of the desk as if steadying himself. He turned slowly. His eyes found Elisa first. He laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even cruel. Just a short, humorless sound, like something breaking. "Well," he said, voice rough. "What is this, number 5? Or 6? Elisa opened her mouth, then closed it again. She took a step forward anyway. "My name is Elisa," she said. "I'm here to help you." Charles' gaze flicked to Cole, then back to her. "You should pack your things," he said flatly. "This never lasts. They always leave." "I don't plan to," Elisa replied. That earned her a look sharp, assessing. He snorted. "They all say that." Cole cleared his throat. "I'll leave you to settle in," he said, already backing toward the door. "Breakfast will be ready shortly." When the door closed behind him, the room felt smaller. Charles watched her like a man watching a stranger step too close to a cliff's edge. Elisa set her bundle down by the wall. "I brought clean cloths," she said, gesturing, "for bathing." His mouth twisted. "I didn't ask." "I know." She moved toward the wash basin, her hands shaking just enough that she had to grip the pitcher with both. She poured water, careful not to spill. "You think you're different," Charles said. "That you'll fix me." "No," Elisa said softly. "I think you're hungry." That stopped him. She ladled soup into a bowl and held it out. He stared at it as if it might bite. "Eat it yourself," he snapped. "I will if you don't," she said. "But it's better warm." He hesitated, then took the bowl. Drank too fast. Coughed violently, soup splashing onto the floor. "I'm sorry," Elisa said quickly, setting the bowl aside and patting his back without thinking. He stiffened under her touch. "Don't," he warned. She withdrew her hand at once. "I'm sorry," she repeated. There was a long silence. That night, she returned with a book she'd borrowed from the shelf. The title meant little to her. The letters swam on the page. She cleared her throat and began. The man walked into the..." She faltered. Her cheeks burned. Charles listened for a moment, then groaned. Stop. She froze. I can try again. He reached out, snatched the book from her hands. You're killing it. He opened it and began to read aloud, his voice low and steady, smoothing the words into something whole. Elisa listened, eyes wide, the sound of his reading settling over her like a blanket. You know your letters, he said after a while, not looking at her. I know some, she admitted. Not all. He kept reading. By the third day, he laughed once when she nearly dropped the wash basin on his foot. By the fifth, he allowed her to walk with him along the edge of the creek, though he kept his distance. One evening, as she fumbled again over a word, he sighed and pointed to the page. That's an R, he said. You don't swallow it. She smiled, small and proud. Thank you. He watched her then, truly watched her, as if seeing something he hadn't expected. You're clumsy, he said, uneducated and entirely unsuited for this place. Elisa tilted her head. But, he shook his head, I don't see anything special about you. She grinned, quick and mischievous. You haven't been looking hard enough. For the first time in years, the house heard a sound it had nearly forgotten. Charles Whitlock laughed. The first real snow came early that year, a thin white veil that softened the hills and quieted the valley. By then, Elisa had been at the Whitlock house for nearly a month, long enough for the servants to stop whispering her name in surprise and start whispering it in warning. She won't last, they said. No one ever does. They were wrong. The house changed in small ways first, the kind that could be denied if one wished. Charles stopped shouting at the walls before dawn. He still paced, still muttered to himself when the nights pressed too close, but the rage had lost its edge. Some evenings, he even waited for Elisa before eating. She noticed everything. The way Cole watched from doorways, his expression smooth and unreadable. The way certain cabinets were kept locked, even from the other servants. The way talk of Mrs. Whitlock, Margaret, ended conversations too quickly, as if her name were a draught of cold air. One night after supper, Charles sat by the fire, instead of retreating to the shadows near the window. Elisa finished washing the dishes and joined him, lowering herself onto the rug a careful distance away. Do you want me to read? She asked. He shook his head. Not tonight. The fire popped. Outside, the creek murmured under its thin skin of ice. After a long while, Charles spoke. They never liked her, he said. Elisa looked up. Your wife? Yes. His eyes stayed on the flames. She was too gentle for this place. Thought kindness could fix what pride had broken. He paused, then added, She tried to fix me too. Elisa waited. She had learned when silence was the better kindness. She believed the world could be explained if you just looked long enough. He continued. Numbers, laws, causes and effects. She used to say there was a reason for everything. His jaw tightened. The night she died, she brought me tea. Said I'd been working too long. Elisa's breath caught, though she didn't know why. I woke to the sound of the cup shattering, Charles said. By the time I reached her, she was on the floor. Couldn't breathe. Her eyes. He stopped. The fire hissed softly. They said it was poison, he went on, his voice flattening. Said I must have put it there. An Indian temper, they called it. Unstable. Dangerous. He finally looked at Elisa then. Do I seem mad to you? She didn't answer right away. She thought of the way he read to her in the evenings, patient despite her mistakes. The way he stood aside so she could walk first along the narrow path by the creek. The way he never once raised a hand toward her, even in anger. No, she said simply. You seem hurt. Something in his face shifted, as if a knot had loosened. They wanted me broken, he said, so they made me that way. Elisa reached out without thinking and stopped just short of touching his sleeve. She drew her hand back again, resting it on her own knee. "You're not broken," she said. He gave a small, humorless smile. "You haven't seen the worst of me." "I've seen enough," she replied. From that night on, the house seemed to listen. Charles began leaving his door open in the evenings. Elisa caught him once standing in the hallway, staring at Margaret's portrait, with a look she couldn't read. He didn't stop her when she lit a lamp beneath it, warming the painted face with a softer glow. But other things troubled her. Cole's presence felt heavier. He appeared more often when Charles and Elisa were together, his footsteps quiet, his questions too few. "How is Mr. Whitlock today?" he would ask. "Fine," Elisa answered. "Did he sleep?" "He's." "Any episodes?" Elisa shook her head. Cole smiled, thin as paper. One afternoon, while Charles napped, Elisa dusted the study. She noticed a drawer left slightly seated beneath the desk. Inside lay paper sold one, sedges yellowed. She caught sight of a ledger, its spine cracked from use. Before she could examine it further, a voice spoke behind her. "That's not for you." She turned. Cole stood in the doorway. "I was only cleaning," she said, closing the drawer. He nodded. Best to leave certain things undisturbed. That night, as she prepared the bath, she noticed something else. The medicine cabinet restocked recently. Bottles she didn't recognize. "Who ordered these?" she asked at supper. Cole answered from the doorway. "Precautions." Charles frowned. "I didn't ask for them." "You didn't need to," Cole said. "We're only thinking of your well-being." Charles' hand whitened around his fork. Elisa felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. Later, when the house had settled into its uneasy quiet, Charles spoke again. "There are things you should know," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, as she set the book aside. She looked up. "I'm listening." "They made me doubt myself," he said. "After the trial, after the sentence. When everyone you know insists you're mad long enough, you start to wonder." "You're not," Elisa said at once. He smiled faintly. "You say that now." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. "I used to keep records," Charles went on, "of the estate. My father taught me to. My Uncle Cole never liked that. Said it was unnecessary." Elisa stilled. "Cole is your uncle?" "By marriage," Charles replied, which made it easier. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Downstairs, a door opened softly. Footsteps crossed the hall. Elisa felt the house hold its breath. Something in the walls knew the truth, even if the people refused to. She closed the book and rose. "You should sleep." Charles nodded, though his eyes stayed on her. As she left the room, Elisa glanced once more down the hall, toward the shadowed stairs. For the first time since she'd arrived, fear crept in. Not of Charles Whitlock, but of the house that had swallowed him whole. And somewhere in that darkness, a secret waited, patient and poisonous. For the moment it would be overheard. The rain began just after sundown, the kind that came down hard and cold, rattling the windows like thrown gravel. By 8 o'clock, the creek had swollen beyond its banks, and the cottonwoods bent low, their branches scraping against the house with a restless, warning sound. Elisa finished clearing the supper dishes in silence. Charles had eaten little, his mood withdrawn, his gaze lingering too long on the shadows beyond the windows. "You should go on," he said at last. "It's a bad night to be walking the halls." "I don't mind," she replied, drying her hands on her apron. "I'll read for a bit." He shook his head. "Not tonight." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'll check on the fire before I turn in." As she stepped into the hallway, a sharp voice drifted up from below. Low, urgent. She paused at the top of the stairs, her hand tightening on the banister. "Can't be careless anymore," Cole was saying, He's not as broken as he used to be. Elisa's breath caught. She leaned back into the shadow, careful not to let the floorboards creak. A woman answered. Lydia, one of the housemates. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. She's the problem, Lydia said. That girl. She's always with him. She won't be for long, Cole replied. I told you when we started this, no loose ends. Elisa's heart began to pound so loudly she was sure they must hear it. You said the same thing before, Lydia hissed. About the wife. There was a pause. Then Cole spoke again, slower now. And look how well that turned out. Elisa clamped a hand over her mouth. She asked questions, Lydia continued, just like this one. And she paid for it, Cole said. A little something in the tea. Enough to make it look like weakness. No marks. No struggle. Elisa's knees nearly buckled. So what do we do now? Lydia whispered. We make the same problem go away, Cole said flatly, before she poisons his mind the way the other one did. The rain thundered against the roof, masking the sharp intake of Elisa's breath. She turned silently, every instinct screaming at her to run, to get to Charles, to tell him everything before it was too late. Her foot landed on the edge of a loose board. It creaked. The voices below stopped. Elisa, Cole called. She ran. Her boots pounded down the back corridor. Skirts gathered in her fists as she bolted toward the servants' wing. She could hear footsteps behind her, fast, determined. She reached the door to the yard, yanked it open. A hand caught her hair, jerking her back so hard her vision fiery white. Please, she gasped. I didn't hear anything. I swear. Cole's face loomed above her, calm as ever, rainwaters dripping from his hat brim. You shouldn't have been listening, he said. They dragged her across the yard, mud sucking at her boots, rain soaking her to the bone. She kicked and clawed, but Lydia was stronger than she looked, her grip like iron. They shoved Elisa into the tool shed and slammed the door shut behind them. The smell of damp wood and rust filled her lungs. Cole struck first. The blow knocked the breath from her chest, sending her sprawling into the wall. She cried out, curling in on herself as another kick landed against her ribs. You talk, Cole said evenly, and you end up like her. Lydia crouched beside Elisa Chisel, gripping her chin hard enough to bruise. We'll kill you, she whispered. Slow if we have to. Elisa sobbed, shaking her head. I won't say anything. I promise. Cole studied her a moment, then nodded once. See that you don't. They hauled her back outside and threw her bundle after her, scattering her few belongings into the mud. Get out, Cole said. Nay. Elisa stumbled down the drive as the rain poured harder, blinding her. She didn't stop running until the lights of the house disappeared behind the trees. Charles woke before dawn. The house was too quiet. Elisa, he called, sitting up sharply. No answer. He dressed quickly and went to her room. The bed was untouched, her bundle gone. A familiar dread settled into his chest. He stormed downstairs, finding Cole already in the dining room, pouring coffee as if nothing were amiss. Where is she? Charles demanded. Cole didn't look up. She left. Charles stared at him. What do you mean she left? She said she couldn't do it anymore. Cole replied smoothly. Said she was afraid. Of you. The words hit like a fist. That's a lie, Charles said hoarsely. Cole met his gaze, unblinking. You were shouting again last night. Anyone would be frightened. Charles' hands shook. She promised she wouldn't leave. Cole shrugged. Promises don't last long around here. Charles turned away, before his uncle could see the doubt crack his face. Elisa reached her family's house, just as the sky began to lighten. She was soaked through, her dress torn, blood running down her shin. Her mother cried out when she saw her, rushing forward with a blanket. What happened? Her father demanded. Who did this to you? Elisa shook her head violently. Please, she whispered, don't ask. They didn't push her. They only held her as she shook, rainwater pooling on the floor. That night, miles away, Charles sat alone in his bedroom, staring at the empty chair by the fire. He replayed every word she'd spoken, every look, every promise. Anger came easily. So did bitterness. If you ran, he muttered into the dark, you're no different from the rest. But the house, with its long memory and deeper truths, creaked softly in the night, as if refusing to believe the lie. And somewhere beyond the rain-soaked roads, Elisa lay awake, bruised and terrified, clutching a secret that could save a manor, destroy them both. Winter broke late that year. When the thaw finally came, it did not bring relief so much as a long gray patience mud in the roads, swollen creeks, and a town eager to forget what it had been whispering only months before. Charles Whitlock did not forget. He moved through the days with a new stillness, as if something vital had been taken, and the rest of him had decided to endure on habit alone. He no longer shouted. He no longer threw books. The servants found this change more unsettling than his rage had ever been. Elisa's chair by the fire remained empty. At first Charles waited. He told himself she would return when the weather cleared, when fear loosened its grip, when whatever trouble had pulled her away lost its hold. He stood on the porch at dusk and scanned the road until the light failed. She did not come. Cole watched all of this with measured interest. He offered sympathy in small, careful doses. Best not dwell on it, he said one morning. People like her move on. Charles did not answer. He had learned the cost of speaking too much. What he did instead was act. The first notice went up outside the general store, nailed to the post beside a flyer advertising seed corn. It was plain, the paper coarse, the ink already bleeding at the edges from damp air. A charcoal sketch of a young woman's face, Elisa's face. Beneath it, written in a steady hand, "Have you seen this woman? Name, Elisa Crow. Last seen near Red Bluff. Reward offered. No mention of madness. No accusations. No pleas. Just a question, asked honestly." People stopped. They stared. Some shook their heads. "That's the Whitlock man," someone said. "Still chasing ghosts," said another. Charles stood across the street, his hat pulled low, watching the paper flutter in the breeze. When one corner tore loose, he crossed over and smoothed it flat with his palm, pressing the tack back into the wood. Carefully, as if the paper mattered. By week's end, there were more notices. On the saloon door, on the fence by the church, at the livery and the rail depot. He paid riders $5 here, 10 there to carry copies to Cheyenne, to Laramie, to any town where a woman with dark hair and quiet eyes might pass unnoticed. At night, he sat alone at his desk and wrote her name again and again, not as a prayer, but as proof. Proof that she had existed. Proof that she had mattered. When someone came with a rumor, he listened. She might have gone east. I heard she married. Could be she didn't want to come back. Each time, something tightened in his chest. But it did not break, because Charles remembered the rain. He remembered the way she had looked the night she said she wasn't afraid of him, the way her hands had trembled when she fed him soup, the bruises on her wrists he had noticed too late. A woman does not leave barefoot in a storm without saying goodbye. So he kept looking. Elisa kept her distance. At first, fear guided her. Fear of Cole's threats. Fear that speaking would bring harm down on her parents. She woke at night with the sound of rain in her ears, her body aching where the bruises had bloomed and faded. But fear could not last forever. What took its place was guilt. She worked odd jobs, mended clothes, scrubbed floors, anything to keep food on the table. She avoided the main road, avoided the store where notices sometimes appeared, curling at the edges. Until one day, she saw one. It was pinned crookedly outside the post office, flapping in the wind. She froze, her breath stalling in her chest. Her face looked back at her from the paper, softer than she remembered. Below it, the question. Elisa turned away, her eyes burning. He was still looking. That night, she told her father everything. Not all at once, not easily. The words came haltingly, as if each one had to fight its way free. About the tea, about the voices she had heard, about the rain and the shed, and the threat that still echoed in her bones. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood, pulled on his coat, and said, "Then we go to the sheriff." The truth, once spoken, did not stop. Other servants came forward, hesitant at first, then steadier. A ledger surfaced. Bottles were examined. The doctor, pressed harder than before, admitted what he had suspected and ignored. Cole was arrested on a cold morning, his composure finally cracking as the irons closed around his wrists. Lydia followed, screaming accusations that no one bothered to hear. The town changed its tune quickly. They spoke now of injustice, of manipulation, of how easily a story could be shaped when the right man held the pen. Charles stood in the courtroom as the charges were read, his hands folded, his face unreadable. When the judge declared him cleared of all wrongdoing, a murmur swept the room. Free. The word felt strange, unfinished. Afterward, people approached him, some with apologies, others with excuses. He accepted none of it. He walked out alone into the sunlight and went home to a house that felt no less empty than before. Because Elisa was still gone. He searched harder then. He replaced faded notices. He added a line at the bottom of the new ones, written smaller, for those who looked closely. "I am still here." Years passed. The search became part of the town's landscape, like the creek or the hills. New faces arrived, old ones moved on. The notices came down and went up again, their edges worn soft by time. One summer evening, a boy stopped in front of one. "She looks like my mama," he said. Charles knelt so they were eye to eye. "Where did you see her?" The boy shrugged. "At the fair, by the river. She had a little girl." Charles thanked him and pressed a silver dollar into his hand. That night, he stood on the porch and watched the horizon darken, hope and restraint warring quietly in his chest. Elisa lived carefully. She raised her daughter with patience and work-worn hands. She did not speak of Charles, though his name lived in her like a second heartbeat. When her husband died, quickly, unwittingly, leaving little but grief, she mourned him honestly. But she never forgot the man who had taught her letters by firelight. She heard his name sometimes, spoken differently now, with respect. And somewhere between regret and courage, a door began to open. Charles Whitlock never stopped looking. Not because he believed she would come back to him unchanged, but because she had never truly left him, and because some bonds, once formed in silence and endurance, did not recognize time as a reason to loosen their hold. The town of Red Bluff had learned to celebrate again. It took years of quiet work, of rebuilding trust the way a man rebuilt a fence after a hard winter, one post at a time. But on the 4th of July, lanterns lined the main street, and the smell of roasting meat drifted from the square. Children ran laughing between wagons. Music spilled from the saloon, rough but earnest. Charles Whitlock arrived just after sundown. He did not come for the noise. He came because the river fair brought people in from miles around, and long habit had taught him that if Elisa still walked this earth, crowds were where she might pass unceasing. He stood near the edge of the square, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the town he no longer feared and had never fully forgiven. His hair was touched with silver now, more at the temples than he liked to admit. The hard lines in his face had not softened, but they had settled, like land after a storm. He had stopped putting up notices 2 years before, not because he had given up, but because searching had changed shape. It no longer looked like paper and charcoal. It looked like waiting without bitterness, like keeping a place in the world open. The first firework burst overhead with a sharp crack, scattering red sparks across the sky. Children shrieked with delight. That was when he saw her. She stood near the riverbank, half turned toward a small girl who tugged at her hand, pointing skyward. Elisa looked older, thinner, perhaps, but unmistakably herself. Her hair was pinned back simply. Her dress was plain, mended at the seams, alive, breathing. Here. Charles did not move at first. He was afraid that if he did, the moment would break apart like smoke. Another firework bloomed, white and gold. Elisa laughed softly, the sound carrying across the water. He stepped forward. Elisa. The name felt different, spoken aloud after so many years. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. She turned. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes widened, filling too fast with tears she did not bother to hide. Charles, she whispered. The little girl looked up at her. Mama? Elisa knelt, steadying herself, her hands trembling as she smoothed the child's hair. Sweetheart, stay right here for a moment. The girl nodded solemnly, though her eyes flicked between them with open curiosity. Charles stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the fine lines around Elisa's eyes, close enough to see the fear flicker there, chased quickly by something stronger. I looked for you, he said. I know, she replied. Her voice broke. I saw the notices. I never believed you ran, he said simply. That was too much. Elisa took a step forward, then another, until the space between them closed. She reached out, hesitated, then pressed her forehead briefly against his chest, as if checking that he was real. I was afraid, she said. They threatened my family. I thought if I came back, I'd destroy you. You saved me, Charles said, even when you left. She shook her head, tears slipping free. I left you alone. No, he said quietly. You gave me a reason to survive being alone. Above them, fireworks thundered and burst, the sky alive with color. Around them, the town celebrated, unaware that something far more important was being repaired at the river's edge. The little girl cleared her throat. Elisa laughed through her tears and turned. This is Clara, she said, my daughter. Charles crouched so he was level with the child. Hello, Clara. Clara studied him carefully. Mama's crying, she announced. Yes, Elisa said, brushing her cheeks, but they are good tears. Clara considered this. Are you her friend? Elisa looked at Charles. He waited. You could say that, Elisa said softly. He's my first love. Charles felt the words settle deep and steady in him. They walked together after that, slowly along the riverbank. Elisa told him what she had never dared write, of her marriage, brief and flawed, of her husband's drinking, of his death, sudden and small, leaving her with grief and a child and little else. I don't come to ask for anything, she said at last. I just didn't want you to think. I don't, Charles interrupted gently. I never did. They stopped where the water ran shallow over smooth stones. I have a house, Charles said. Too big for one man. Too quiet. You and Clara would have a place there. No obligation. No expectation. Elisa looked at the dark water, then at her daughter, who was crouched nearby, entranced by the reflections of light on the surface. And if I say no, Elisa asked. Then I will still be glad you are alive, Charles replied. And I will still be grateful. She studied his face, the steadiness, the absence of demand. The man who had once been broken by the world now offered choice as freely as breath. Yes, she said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just yes. 6 months later, the Whitlock house stood open to the sun. The curtains were lighter. The doors no longer locked themselves in the evening. Clara's laughter echoed down the halls where silence had once ruled. Elisa moved through the rooms with an ease born not of ownership, but of belonging. Charles watched them often from the doorway, from the porch, from the window that once framed only loneliness. He did not try to name what he felt. He simply lived inside it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the valley gold, Charles handed Elisa a single red flower from the garden she had helped restore. "The first one," he said. She smiled and took it. "Then we're doing something right." They stood together. The past no longer a prison, the future no longer a question. Not because the world had forgiven them, but because they had forgiven themselves. And in the wide, patient land of the American West, that was more than enough. In the end, this is a story about endurance, forgiveness, and the quiet courage to choose love again when the world has tried to break you. If this journey moved you, please hit subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment so I can continue bringing you even more meaningful stories. Thank you all for listening.